Eleanor Bennett had never been one to take risks. 72. Her days in St. Paul, Minnesota, followed a comfortable routine. Mornings with the newspaper and coffee, afternoons tending her garden, evenings with crossword puzzles and the occasional phone call from her son. But comfort, she'd learned, had a sneaky way of turning into a cage. Her husband, Henry, had passed 3 years earlier, leaving a quiet void that only grew with each passing day. Their decades together had been steady and kind, yet overshadowed by a cautiousness that felt more his than hers. She'd never questioned it until now. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the spark was lit. Eleanor sat on the porch, phone in hand, scrolling through photos of a friend's Alaskan cruise. The images of glaciers and mountain trails made her chest tighten with a mix of longing and regret. She'd always wanted to see Alaska, but Henry had insisted it was too far, too expensive, too cold. Old people shouldn't travel, he'd say with a laugh, shaking his head. Old people shouldn't travel, she muttered aloud. And the phrase stuck in her throat like a dare. The next day, Eleanor found herself at the library, buried in travel guides and maps, her heart pounding like a teenager's. 50 states in 50 days. The idea was outrageous, ludicrous, even. But the more she thought about it, the more it felt like a lifeline. She scribbled in a small spiral notebook: Alaska, Hawaii, California, Oregon, Nevada. The list grew, and so did her determination. She could practically hear Henry's voice, scoffing, and that only fueled her resolve. For the first time in years, she felt alive. "Ma'am, can I help you with something?" a librarian asked gently. Eleanor looked up, her eyes fierce with new purpose. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "I'm planning the trip of a lifetime." The librarian smiled politely, but Eleanor didn't miss the hesitation in her eyes. Eleanor had seen that look before from her son, her neighbors, even her friends. That mix of concern and disbelief that said, she's too old for this. But she wasn't too old. She was just getting started. That night she sat in her kitchen, with a steaming cup of chamomile tea, staring at a wall map she'd pinned up. Every state was marked with a pushpin, each one daring her to prove the world wrong. She thought of Henry, his gentle smile, his caution. She missed him fiercely, but she'd spent enough years living on the safe side of life. This journey wasn't just for her, it was for every woman who'd ever been told to sit quietly and accept her limitations. Eleanor took a deep breath. 50 states in 50 days. Sounded impossible, but wasn't that exactly why she had to try? She opened her laptop, the glow of the screen reflecting in her determined eyes, and booked her first flight to Alaska. The adventure had begun. Eleanor's suitcase lay open on her bed, half filled with sweaters and slacks. A few t-shirts she'd picked up on sales racks over the years. And a battered pair of hiking boots Henry had always teased her about. "You planning to scale Everest?" "Ellie," he'd chuckled. She'd never worn them on a real hike, but she packed them now, defiant. The morning was soft with mist drifting in from the Mississippi River. St. Paul's skyline glowed under the promise of a sunrise Eleanor barely noticed as she moved through the house, each step echoing with a quiet finality. She paused at the fireplace mantel to pick up a photo. Henry grinning on their trip to Niagara Falls, his arm around her shoulder. "I'm doing this for both of us," she whispered. She'd spoken to him more in the past few days than she had in the 3 years since he'd been gone. Grief was strange that way, how it sharpened and softened in turns. Her son, David, had called the night before, his voice tight with worry. "Mom, this is crazy. 50 states, 50 days. Do you know how airports are these days? I mean, you've never even driven through the Rockies, let alone David." She'd interrupted, calm but unyielding. "I need to do this. Please try to understand." He'd sighed. "Call me every day. Okay? Just please. Be careful." Eleanor had promised she would. It wasn't that she didn't feel afraid, she did. Airports, rental cars, hotels, with confusing layouts and keycards that never worked right. But the fear was a small price to pay for the sense of purpose swelling inside her chest at the airport. She found herself moving through a world that felt faster and more crowded than she remembered. People rushed past, eyes glued to phones, children whining for snacks, and announcements crackling over the loudspeakers. She clutched her boarding pass like a lifeline, her hands trembling just slightly. Alaska Airlines Flight 233 to Anchorage. Now boarding at Gate 17, Anchorage. Her first stop, her stomach did a flop. The furthest she'd ever traveled was Florida, and that had been Henry's idea. A slow cruise with shuffleboard and bingo. This was different. This was hers. On the plane, Eleanor settled into her seat and glanced out the window as the engines roared to life. The ground pulled away in a rush of gray tarmac and green grass, and then the world opened wide beneath her, a patchwork quilt of fields. Rivers and tiny towns she'd never known, by name Dot, as the plane soared above the clouds. Eleanor felt a tear slip down her cheek, a mixture of excitement and grief, terror and hope. She thought of the years she'd spent making safe choices. Kay, always following Henry's lead, always letting fear or practicality clip her wings. Now, sky was her own. A young woman in the seat beside her glanced over and smiled politely. "First time to Alaska?" she asked. Eleanor nodded, brushing her tear away with the back of her hand. "First time anywhere, really." The young woman grinned. "You're gonna love it. It's wild. It's unpredictable. Beautiful." Eleanor laughed, the sound trembling but true. "Sounds perfect." Anchorage loomed ahead, waiting to greet her with snow-capped mountains and air that smelled of pine and possibility. She'd made it this far, and no one could take that away. Tomorrow, she'd step off that plane and begin the first leg of her 50-state odyssey. But tonight, somewhere between the earth and the stars, Leonard Bennett let herself believe that adventure wasn't just for the young. It was for the brave. The chill hit her the moment she stepped off the plane, crisp and biting, yet invigorating. Eleanor zipped her coat up to her chin and took a deep breath of air so pure it felt like it might scrub her lungs clean. She'd always imagined Alaska as a postcard, majestic glaciers, towering pines, endless wilderness, but standing here on the tarmac of Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport, it felt real in a way she hadn't expected. The sun, low and golden, cast long shadows across the snow-dusted ground. Eleanor paused to soak it in. The jagged silhouette of the Chugach Mountains, the tinge of wood smoke in the air, the buzz of people bustling around her with skis and hiking packs. She felt small and big all at once. She'd booked a modest hotel near downtown Anchorage, nothing fancy, just a clean room with a view of the inlet and a promise of hot coffee in the morning. The taxi driver, a grizzled man named Ray, had seemed skeptical when she'd told him about her plan. 50 states. "Huh," he said, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "That's a hell of a trip for anyone, let alone, well, you know." Eleanor smiled, unfazed. "I know. That's why I'm doing it." He'd chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, good luck to ya." She checked into her room and dropped her suitcase on the bed. The place smelled faintly of pine-scented cleaner, and the comforter was decorated with moose silhouettes. Eleanor laughed. Softly, it was kitschy but perfect. She opened the window a crack and let in the cold Alaskan air, watching the sky fade to a deep indigo. Her stomach rumbled. She'd barely eaten since Minneapolis. She found a small diner on the corner, the neon sign buzzing in the cold. Inside, the walls were lined with photos of fishermen holding up enormous halibut, and a group of men in Carhartt jackets laughed over beers at the bar. Eleanor took a seat at a booth by the window. A young waitress approached, ponytail swinging. "Hey there, hun. What can I get ya?" "Just a burger and a coffee," Eleanor said, smiling. "Maybe a piece of that pie. Apple or berry?" "Surprise me," Eleanor said with a grin, as she waited. She pulled out her spiral notebook. She'd started jotting down notes about each state, little impressions, people she met, flavors she tasted. She wrote, "Alaska, bigger than I ever imagined. Air so clean it hurts." A man at the next booth caught her eye. He looked to be in his 60s, with a thick gray beard and eyes that crinkled when he smiled. "Where you headed after this?" he asked, nodding at her open notebook. "Everywhere," she replied. "Every single state." His eyebrows shot up. "By yourself?" She nodded, feeling a familiar twinge of doubt in his expression. "Damn," he said, grinning. "You're braver than most folks I know." She laughed, the sound warming her from the inside. "I guess I am." The waitress brought her burger mountain of meat and cheese and a slice of warm, gooey berry pie. Eleanor savored every bite, watching the Alaskan night settle in beyond. The glass. Later, back at the hotel, she lay under the moose-printed comforter. The sounds of the city fading into silence. She felt a fatigue deeper than her bones, but also a glow of satisfaction she hadn't known in years. Tomorrow. She'd hop a small plane to Juneau, then onward to the Pacific Northwest. Each day, each state would bring new challenges and new discoveries. As she drifted off to sleep, Eleanor whispered to herself, "I'm really doing this." And for the first time in a long time, she believed it. Eleanor awoke to the pink glow of dawn, a tangle of sheets around her ankles. Her body ached from the previous day's travel, but her mind buzzed with anticipation. She scribbled in her notebook, Juneau was a dream, the mountains rising straight. From the sea, glaciers like frozen rivers, the air so sharp it felt like it might crack her lungs open. The next leg of her journey would take her south, a flight from Juneau to Seattle. Then a rental car to Oregon. The Pacific Northwest, Henry had always said, was too rainy for a proper vacation. She smiled at the memory he'd had a practical streak a mile wide, but that practicality had kept them close to home, playing it safe. At the Juneau airport, she fumbled with her ticket at the kiosk, pressing the wrong buttons until a kind young man in a green fleece jacket offered to help. "Don't worry, ma'am. These things confuse everyone," he said with a grin. She thanked him, cheeks warm. Every small kindness felt like a gift. Seattle greeted her with gray drizzle and the smell of damp concrete. She spent a night in a modest hotel near the airport, listening to the steady patter of rain on the window. In the morning, she picked up her rent-a-car, small blue sedan pulled out of the city under skies that threatened a storm. The highway south felt like a river, pulling her along. Each mile marker felt like a victory. Each exit sign a reminder that the world was bigger than her memories. She stopped at a roadside diner in Olympia, Washington, a place with worn red booths and a waitress who called everyone Hun, traveling. "Alone?" the waitress asked, pouring Eleanor a steaming cup of coffee. "Yeah," Eleanor said, smiling. "On my way to Oregon, trying to see all 50 states. The waitress let out a low whistle. "Well, aren't you something? I hope you write a book about it one day." Eleanor's heart skipped. Maybe she would. Crossing the border into Oregon felt like entering a new world. The rain eased, giving way to a softer drizzle that misted the rolling hills. She pulled off at a scenic overlook, staring out at the Willamette Valley stretching in shades of green and gold. She parked the car, stepped out, and let the mist settle on her skin. It felt like a baptism of sorts, proof she was still alive. Still moving. She remembered Henry's reluctance, his worry about slippery roads and black ice, and she smiled, feeling braver than she'd ever known. In Portland. She booked a small motel on the east side, just a bed, a shower, and a neon sign that buzzed all night. She strolled down to a food cart pod, the air thick with the smells of grilled meats and roasted coffee. She ordered a taco from a young woman with tattoos down both arms. Then found a bench and unwrapped the foil. The first bite made her eyes water, spicy and smoky. Nothing like the bland meal she'd grown used to. She grinned and scribbled in her notebook, Oregon, green, alive, a place that makes your eyes and your mouth dash water. As she ate, she noticed a man with a weathered backpack, his hair wild, his beard unruly, strumming a guitar on the corner. His voice was rough but carried a strange tenderness as he sang about roads and rivers, love and loss. She dropped a few dollars in his open case, feeling a kinship with his wandering spirit. Back at the motel, she lay in bed, rain tapping the window. The day had been long, the road endless. Okay, but she felt stronger somehow, like every mile had polished something inside her that had been dull for too long. Tomorrow, she'd head to California, an ocean of memories waiting to be revisited. Tonight, though, she was content with the sound of the rain, the lingering taste of spice on her tongue, and the quiet certainty that the journey had only just begun. The sun rose over Portland, brushing the city's skyline with a soft glow that hinted at the promise of a new day. Eleanor packed her suitcase, folded her rain slicker neatly, and took one last look around her small motel room. She'd spent the night listening to the steady drizzle, her mind drifting between memories of Henry and the road. Ahead, California, a state that carried so much weight in her imagination, beaches, redwoods, freeways stretching forever. Henry had always dismissed California as overrated and overcrowded. But she'd always wanted to see it for herself, to experience that golden light that had drawn so many dreamers. She crossed the border just after noon, the landscape shifting. From Oregon's gentle hills to California's boldness, wide highways. Billboards advertising everything from beaches to wine tours and the promise of the Pacific just out of reach. She stopped at a roadside fruit stand, the scent of strawberries filling the air. The young woman behind the counter wore a floppy sun hat and a bright smile. "Road trip?" she asked, handing Eleanor a paper bag heavy with berries. 50 states in 50 days, Eleanor said, grinning. "Whoa!" the girl laughed. "You're my hero." Hero. The word surprised Eleanor, but it warmed her. She'd never thought of herself as heroic, just stubborn. But maybe, just maybe, there was a kind of bravery in refusing to let life shrink. She decided to bypass the big cities for now. Los Angeles could wait. She wanted to ease into California to let the state reveal itself in its quieter corners. She took Highway 101 south, windows down. The ocean sent drifting in like an invitation in Mendocino. She found a small coastal inn, its wooden deck overlooking a rocky cove where the waves crashed in white foam. The clerk at the front desk was a young man with a ponytail and a warm smile. "Traveling alone?" he asked, handing her a key. "Yes," Eleanor said, her voice steady. He nodded thoughtfully. "Good for you." That evening, she walked the cliffs, the wind pulling at her hair. The sun dipped low, turning the ocean molten gold. She thought of Henry, of his cautious nature, and wondered what he'd say if he could see her now windblown and free. Toes inches from the edge of the world. A family passed her on the trailer, coupled with 2 young children. The boy, no more. Then Six waved at her, his eyes bright with curiosity. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Everywhere," Eleanor answered with a smile. The boy grinned and gave her a thumbs up before racing ahead. That night, she sat on the inn's small deck, her notebook open, pen in hand. She wrote, "California wind in my hair, salt on my lips. For once, I'm not afraid of what comes next." She slept with the window open, the ocean's rhythm a lullaby. Tomorrow, she'd continue south San Francisco, maybe Monterey. Mile carried her deeper into the unknown, but instead of fear, she felt a sense of exhilaration as she drifted to sleep. She realized that for the first time in years, she was no longer running from loneliness or grief. She was running towards something, a version of herself that had been waiting patiently. Just beyond the horizon, California had always called to her. Now, finally, she was answering. Eleanor felt an electric thrill as she crossed the Golden Gate Bridge, its famous red towers rising like sentinels against the pale morning sky. Traffic was light this early, and the fog clung to the cables, softening the city's sharp edges. She'd seen photos of the bridge her whole life, but driving across it windows down. Hair blowing felt like a personal triumph. She found a small motel in the Marina district, its neon sign buzzing quietly even in daylight. The clerk, a thin man with round glasses and a warm smile, handed her a key and asked about her plans. "Just passing through," she said, her voice light. "Seeing all 50 states." Wow, he said, impressed. You're not letting anything hold you back. She shook her head. Not anymore. San Francisco felt alive in a way that was different from anywhere she'd been so far. The hills climbed and fell like waves. The air smelled of salt and sourdough, and the sidewalks teemed with people from every corner of the world. She wandered Fisherman's Wharf, the Thames of sea lions and fried fish mixing in the breeze at a small cafe. She sat with a steaming cup of coffee, watching the fog roll in like a living thing. She'd been writing notes in her spiral notebook state each moment. When the waitress, a young woman with a flower tattoo on her wrist, saw her scribbling, she smiled. "You're a writer?" she asked. "Maybe," Eleanor said. "Or maybe just someone who wants to remember." Later that afternoon, she made her way to a small park overlooking the bay. The Golden Gate stood framed by fog and sun, a bridge between here and everywhere else. She thought of Henry again, how he would have worried about the traffic. The crowd, she wondered if he would have liked it here. She pulled out her phone and called David. He answered on the second ring. "Mom, where are you today?" he asked, relief and concern mixing in his voice. "San Francisco," she said. "Are you? Should see this place. It's alive, David. I feel like I'm 20 again." He laughed softly. "I'm glad, Mom. Just please be careful." "I am," she promised. "I always am. But I'm also living, finally." She wandered down Lombard Street, the famous crooked road, marveling at the flowers that spilled from every corner. She stopped to ask a local man for directions to Chinatown, and he pointed her uphill, smiling at her enthusiasm. "Enjoy it," he said. "This city's like a living thing, always changing, always challenging you to keep up." She made her way to Chinatown and found herself swept up in a festival red lantern swinging overhead. Drums echoing down the alleys. She watched the lion dancers, their costumes bright and fierce, and felt a surge of energy. A reminder that life wasn't done with her yet. At the end of the day, she sat on a bench at Pier 39. The sea lions barking in the background and let the salt air fill her lungs. She pulled out her notebook and wrote, "San Francisco, a city that dares you to keep moving." To believe in the impossible, she felt the fatigue of the day settle into her bones. But it was the good kind, the kind that reminded her she'd lived every moment. Tomorrow, she'd head east toward Nevada, then Utah. But tonight, she watched the sun slip below the horizon. Feeling at home in the in-between, adventure, she thought, was not just for the young. It was for the willing. And she was more than willing, she was ready. The sun rose early, bright and unfiltered, as Eleanor steered her rental car eastward, leaving behind San Francisco's fog for the stark openness of Nevada. The city had awakened something in her hunger for movement, for the unpredictable, but now the road stretched like a promise into the horizon. A ribbon of asphalt lined with sagebrush and sun-bleached billboards. She'd never driven this far alone. And the solitude both comforted and unsettled her. Henry had always taken the wheel on road trips, mapping every gas station and motel like a general plotting a campaign. She thought of him often on this journey, how he'd shake his head at her lack of planning, her refusal to check every detail. Twice. But she had learned to trust herself now. She stopped at a small diner just outside Reno, its sign faded by sun and time. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a gentle smile, poured Eleanor a cup of coffee and asked about her plans. 50 states in 50 days, Eleanor said, feeling the weight of it even as the words felt lighter with each telling. The waitress whistled softly. "That's one hell of a ride," she said. Eleanor smiled. "I guess I needed to see how far I could go." She left Reno behind and followed the old highway toward the Utah border. The landscape unfolded like a painting, endless plains, rocky outcrops, distant mountains that shimmered in the midday heat. She marveled at the quiet, at the way the wind whispered through the dry grass, at the sense that time itself stretched and slowed out here, somewhere near Elko. She pulled over at a dusty roadside rest stop, a lone picnic table, a trash can, overflowing with empty soda cups. She sat on the bench and let the desert sun warm her face. She'd expected the desert to feel empty, but instead, it felt like possibility, a place where anything could happen, where a woman could reinvent herself at 72 without apology. She wrote in her notebook, Nevada, vast, silent, honest. The kind of place that makes you listen to yourself dawn in the afternoon. She crossed into Utah. The landscape changing, subtly rock formations rose like ancient cathedrals, and the sky turned a deeper blue. She'd planned a night in Salt Lake City, but as the sun began to set, she felt a pull to keep going. She passed signs for small towns with names that felt like whispers from another time. Windover, Toole, Grantsville. She finally pulled into a modest motel in the outskirts of Tortsbell. Salt Lake City, its neon sign flickering in the dusk. The clerk, a young man with headphones draped around his neck, gave her a curious glance as she checked in. "Traveling solo?" he asked, handing her a key. "Yes," she said, smiling. "Just me and the road." He nodded. "Good for you," he said. "It takes guts." In her room, she unpacked and took a long hot shower, washing away the dust and sweat of the day. She felt the fatigue of the road in her bones, but also a sense of accomplishment, a quiet certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She sat by the window, looking out at the city lights twinkling in the dark. She thought about Henry, how he would have worried about the desert, about breakdowns and empty gas tanks, but she hadn't needed saving. She'd navigated the miles herself, trusted the road, trusted her own instincts. In her notebook, she wrote, Utah, a place of quiet strength, a reminder that I am more than I ever thought I could be. Tomorrow, she'd head south toward Arizona and the Grand Canyon, another dream on her list. But tonight, she let the desert night wrap around her like a blanket, safe in the knowledge that she was not too old, not too fragile, not too late. She was exactly where she needed to be, in motion, in wonder, in the middle of a journey that was hers alone. Morning dawned clear and cool over Salt Lake City, the mountains painted pink by the first rays of sunlight. Eleanor packed her bag quickly, eager to get back on the road. She'd slept deeply, a kind of sleep that comes only when you've earned it. Arizona called to her like a song, something about the desert's fierce beauty. The promise of standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon and feeling small in the best possible way. Henry had once shown her a photo of the Grand Canyon in a magazine, circling it with his pen but never quite committing to the trip. Too far, he'd said. Too expensive. Too everything. But now Eleanor couldn't wait to see it. The drive south was long and lonely. But she loved the changing landscape. How the trees gave way to red rock and sand. How the horizon seemed to stretch wider with every mile. She stopped for gas in a small town called Kanab, where a woman at the pump next to her asked, "Where you headed?" "Grand Canyon," Eleanor replied, her smile unstoppable. The woman, younger by decades, but with the same dust of the road on her shoes, gave her a thumbs up. "Bucket list, huh?" Eleanor laughed. "More like a life list." She reached the park by late afternoon, the sky overhead a brilliant cloudless blue. She parked at the south rim, slinging her small backpack over her shoulder. The air smelled of pine and dust, and the sun burned on her skin in a way that felt more alive, then uncomfortable. The trail to the overlook was busy, families with cameras, hikers with heavy packs, couples hand in hand. Eleanor moved among them, feeling both a part of and separate from the crowd. She paused at a bench, catching her breath, before continuing on. Then, suddenly, there it was. The Grand Canyon. It defied description, layers of red and gold shadows, shifting like living things as the sun dipped lower. It wasn't just big. It was endless, a reminder that time could carve the deepest marks in the strongest stone. Eleanor stood at the railing, tears welling in her eyes. Not from sadness, but from awe. A young couple stood nearby, their arms around each other, whispering and laughing. The woman caught Eleanor's eye and smiled. "First time?" she asked. "Yes," Eleanor said, her voice catching. "It's incredible, isn't it?" "It's everything," Eleanor said. She found a quiet spot a little further down the trail and sat on a rock, pulling out her notebook. The wind tugged at the pages, but she didn't mind. She wrote, "Arizona, a place that reminds you how small you are and how strong." She closed her eyes and let the wind brush against her face, feeling the canyon's vastness settle in her bones later. She checked into a small lodge near the park entrance, her room simple but clean. She took a shower and lay on the bed, the day's images playing in her mind. She thought of Henry Howe. He would have been amazed by the canyon, how he would have made a joke to hide his awe. She missed him, but it didn't hurt the same way. Any more she'd carried him with her through Alaska's glaciers, Oregon's mist, California's sun, Nevada's deserts. Now, here in Arizona, she realized she wasn't leaving him behind. She was moving forward with him, the part of him that had always been curious, always wondering. Tomorrow, she'd head east toward New Mexico, the next chapter in her journey. But tonight, she let the quiet of the desert night hold her. She'd faced the immensity of the Grand Canyon, and she'd stood her ground. Adventure, she thought, wasn't always about what you saw. Sometimes it was about who you became. Eleanor left Arizona at dawn, the horizon blushing with the promise of a new day. Her motel's coffee was weak, but she didn't mind. The drive itself was her fuel, now a winding ribbon of highway that carried her further from the life she'd always known and deeper into the person she was becoming. Crossing the border into New Mexico felt different from the other state lines she'd crossed. The land unfolded in vast stretches of high desert, red mesas rising like ancient sentinels, and the air smelled of dust and possibility. She'd always imagined New Mexico as dry and empty. But it was more than that. It was a place that whispered of stories, of cultures and struggles layered like sediment in the cliffs. She stopped at a small roadside cafe outside Gallup, a squat adobe building with faded murals of dancing cocopelli and desert flowers. The woman behind the counter wore turquoise earrings and a smile that reached her eyes. "Coffee?" she asked, already pouring a steaming cup into a chipped mug. "Please," Eleanor replied, grateful for the warmth. "Where are you headed?" "Everywhere," Eleanor said with a small laugh. 50 states in 50 days. The woman let out a soft whistle. "That's brave," she said. "Most people just talk about doing things like that." Eleanor sipped her coffee and smiled, feeling the compliment settle like a warm stone in her chest. "It's never too late," she said. The woman's eyes softened. "No, ma'am, it's not." Back on the road, Eleanor followed signs too. Santa Fe, her GPS guiding her through the winding highways. The landscape shifted from harsh desert to gentle hills, pinyon trees dotting the horizon. She checked into a small inn with adobe walls and a courtyard filled with bright geraniums. The air smelled of sage and sun-warmed clay in the late afternoon. She wandered the historic plaza, its cobblestones worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Artists sold turquoise jewelry and paintings under the shade of the portico, and the scent of roasting chiles drifted from nearby cafes. She paused at a stall where an older woman played delicate silver bracelets and necklaces. Eleanor picked up a simple cuff etched with a hummingbird. "That one's special," the woman said, her voice low and kind. "Hummingbirds remind us to find joy in the small moments." Eleanor smiled, imagining Henry rolling his eyes at her sentimentality, but he'd always indulged her little treasures. She bought the bracelet and fastened it around her wrist, feeling its weight like a promise. That night, she treated herself to dinner at a small restaurant tucked away from the main square. A man played classical guitar near the bar, the notes gentle and wistful. Eleanor ordered enchiladas and let the spice warm her from the inside out. She pulled out her notebook and wrote, "New Mexico, a place of stories, some written in stone, some in the faces of people who've seen too much sun and too many promises broken." She thought of the hummingbird, of its tireless flight, its small but mighty heart. She thought of Henry, how he would have worried about the altitude, the unfamiliar foods, but she felt closer to him here than she had in any of the safer, smaller places she'd known. Tomorrow, she'd head into Texas, the land of wide open spaces and big dreams. But tonight, she let the music, the warmth, and the gentle desert wind fill her with gratitude. She wasn't just crossing states off a list anymore. She was stitching together a new version of herself, one that had room for bravery and sorrow, joy and quiet wonder. Eleanor smiled, feeling the hummingbird cuff against her wrist. A reminder that the smallest things, like a moment of kindness or a desert sunrise, could make all the difference. Eleanor woke before dawn, the desert night still lingering in the air as she packed her suitcase and loaded the car. New Mexico had given her more than she'd expected: small kindnesses, unexpected conversations, and a hummingbird bracelet. That felt like a talisman. Now, as she crossed into Texas, she felt a flicker of excitement. The road stretched wide and straight, a ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the horizon. Texas was vast in a way she hadn't imagined flatlands. That gave way to rolling hills, the occasional ranch fence, windmills spinning like slow prayers in the breeze. She found comfort in the emptiness, in the sense that every mile brought her closer to something she hadn't even named yet. Her first stop was Amarillo, place Henry had once wanted to see but never had the nerve to visit. She checked into a modest motel, another neon sign promising free Wi-Fi and queen beds. The clerk, a young woman with a Texas twang and a warm smile, handed over the key with a wink. "Y'all traveling alone?" she asked. "Yeah," Eleanor said, smiling. "On my way to see all 50 states. The clerk's eyes widened. "That's amazing, ma'am. Good on you." Eleanor dropped her bags and headed straight for the Cadillac Ranch, a roadside art installation she'd seen in a travel book. 10 Cadillacs half buried in the ground, their bodies covered in layers of spray paint. The desert sun beat down, and the air smelled faintly of gasoline and dust. A group of teenagers laughed as they added their own Marca swirl of neon pink on a hood that had probably been red once. Eleanor picked up a can someone had left behind and, feeling oddly defiant, sprayed a small heart on the roof of the nearest car. It felt rebellious and sweet all at once. She stepped back and smiled. "Old dogs, new tricks," she whispered to herself. That night, she found a small BBQ joint off the main Draga family place with worn wooden tables and neon beer signs. The brisket melted in her mouth, smoky and tender, and the musican old country tune made her want to dance. She thought of Henry, of how he'd tap his foot to the beat but never stand, too self-conscious. She missed him in a quiet, accepting way, now like missing a chapter of her life rather than the whole story. After dinner, she walked outside to find the sky awash in stars, more than she'd ever seen back in Minnesota. She pulled her jacket tighter around her and felt the enormity of it, all the sky, the state, the journey. She realized she wasn't just crossing states. She was crossing thresholds. She wrote in her notebook, "Texas, where the sky is bigger than your regrets. And every mile is a chance to start over." At the motel, she called David. He picked up on the second ring. "Mom, where are you now?" "Texas," she said, her voice calm and proud. "Cadillac Ranch, brisket for dinner, and the biggest sky I've ever seen." He laughed. "Sounds like you're having the time of your life." "I am," she said. "I really am." Tomorrow, she'd head east toward Louisiana, and she couldn't wait to taste the gumbo and hear the music. But tonight, she drifted to sleep with the Texas sky above her, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. For the first time in a long time, she felt limitless, like the road might stretch on forever, and she was strong enough to follow it. The morning sun spilled over Texas as Eleanor drove east, the landscape changing with every mile. Ranches gave way to thick forests, and the air grew heavier, richer, tinged with the scent of magnolias and humidity. Louisiana was Calenga, place Henry had always said was too hot, too loud, too unpredictable. But unpredictability was exactly what Eleanor craved now, crossing the border into the Pelican State. She felt a thrill of anticipation. She'd read about New Orleans her whole life. Jazz clubs, beignets, the smell of coffee, and old wood. She wanted to taste it all. She arrived in the city by late afternoon, the sun dipping low behind the Mississippi River. The streets were alive music. Drifting from open doors, people laughing on balconies. The sound of a saxophone weaving its way through the air like a promise. Her hotel was a small inn in the French Quarter. A creaky building with wrought iron railings and a friendly desk. Clerk named Marie, first time in New Orleans? Marie asked, sliding a key across the worn countertop. Yes, Eleanor said. Finally. Marie grinned. Well, you picked the right time. Frenchman Street is hopping tonight. You like music? I love it, Eleanor said, her eyes bright. She unpacked quickly just enough to freshen up and headed out into the night. The Quarter was a sensory feast, the smell of jambalaya and fried shrimp. The shimmer of neon signs. Voices raised in song and laughter. She found a small jazz club tucked in an alley, its windows glowing gold dot inside. The place was alive, a trumpet wailing, a stand-up bass thumping steady. She slipped onto a stool at the bar. Ordered a Sazerac, she'd read about it in a guidebook, and let the music wash over her. She'd always loved jazz's improvisation, its refusal to follow strict lines. It reminded her of her journey. Planned in theory, but unfolding in unexpected ways. An older man with a white beard sat next to her, tapping his foot in time. He noticed her notebook and smiled. Writing about your travels? He asked. Yes, Eleanor said. 50 states. In 50 days. Damn, he whistled. That's living, ma'am. It's real living. They talked between songs about life, about loss, about finding yourself when you least expect it. He'd lost his wife 5 years ago, he told her, and still came. Here every week to feel close to her memory. Eleanor felt a pang of understanding. Loss was like that ache that never really left, but sometimes found comfort in music, in strangers, in moments of shared humanity. Later, she wandered the streets, the music following her like a companion. She stopped at Café du Monde, ordered beignets dusted in powdered sugar, and sat on a bench by the river. The Mississippi flowed dark and patient. A reminder that time was always moving. She opened her notebook and wrote, Louisiana, a place where music and memory dance together. Where every note feels like a heartbeat. As she sat there, sugar clinging to her fingers. She thought of Henry Howie would have grumbled at the noise, but maybe would have let himself sway to the rhythm, only for her. She missed him in a softer way, now a companion on the journey. Rather than a chain holding her back, tomorrow she'd head toward Mississippi. Then Alabama, then the final stretch back to Minnesota. But tonight, in the heart of Louisiana, she felt alive, tangled in the music, the laughter. The sweat and sugar of a city that didn't know how to stand still. Adventure, she thought, wasn't just about the miles. It was about letting yourself be moved by music, by people, by moments you couldn't plan. She smiled as she licked the sugar from her fingers, the sounds of jazz filling the night. She was exactly where she needed to be. Eleanor left Louisiana at sunrise, the city's neon fading behind her as the Mississippi River lay still in the morning mist. Her journey was drawing to a close, and with each mile northward, she felt a bittersweet ache relief at returning home, but also a quiet grief that this grand adventure was ending. Mississippi rolled by in shades of green, small towns blinking past like signposts in a dream. She paused in Jackson for a quick cup of coffee, exchanging pleasantries with a young barista who wore a wide smile and a name tag that read Renee. Where are you headed? Renee asked, wiping the counter. Back to Minnesota, Eleanor said. I've been to every state, 50 states in 50 days. Renee's eyes widened. No way. That's amazing. Eleanor smiled, savoring the surprise and admiration. It's everything I needed. She pressed on the road, a steady hum beneath her tires. Alabama brought warm breezes and oak, trees draped in Spanish moss, and then Tennessee, where she'd once traveled with Henry to see Graceland. She thought of him then, of how he'd marveled at Elvis's gold records, but rolled his eyes at the pink Cadillac. Driving north through Kentucky, the landscape soft in hills rolling into valleys, rivers cutting through farmland. She felt a twinge of homesickness she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. She'd come so far, met so many people, tasted so many new flavors of life. But St. Paul was still home to a place where her roots ran deep, even if her branches had stretched. Across the country, in Illinois, a summer thunderstorm rolled in. She pulled off the interstate at a rest stop, rain pelting the windshield like a drum. She closed her eyes and listened to the rain's rhythm, feeling the miles slip away. She thought of the woman she'd been timid, afraid to challenge the boundaries others had set for her. And she thought of the woman she was now, weathered but unbroken, bolder than she'd ever imagined. She scribbled in her notebook one last time, 50 states, 50 days. But what I really found was the strength to live on my own terms. The rain eased as she crossed the Wisconsin border. By the time she reached Minnesota, the sky had cleared, leaving only a warm breeze and the smell of wet asphalt. She pulled into her driveway just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of gold and lavender. The house looked the same: white siding, tidy garden, the old oak tree still standing guard. She turned off the engine and sat for a moment, letting the quiet settle around her. David pulled up a few minutes later, his face a mixture of relief and pride. He bounded out of the car and hugged her tightly. "Mom, you made it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I did," she whispered, holding him close. "Every single state." He pulled back, eyes shining. "I'm so proud of you. I can't believe you did it." She smiled, tears welling. "I needed to prove to myself that I could." That night, Eleanor unpacked in her small kitchen, placing the hummingbird bracelet on the counter, the notebook, next to IT pages filled with the names of places and people who had changed her. She brewed a cup of tea, her hands steady, her heart full. In the living room, she settled into her favorite chair, the one Henry had always claimed as his own. She looked around the room, familiar and comforting, and felt no regrets. She'd faced her fears, embraced the unknown, and returned stronger. 50 states. 50 days. 50 versions of herself she'd never known she could be. As the night settled around her, Eleanor smiled. The journey had ended, but the adventure would never truly be over. Because the real adventure, she realized, had always been about learning to live without limits, and in that she had found her freedom.